Hello everybody and thanks for joining me. Something a bit different today. I'm tying a semi-realistic Peeping Caddis. The hook I'm using is an Ahrex FW531 size 10. It's got a nice curve to it which we'll be using to make the body. The thread I'm using up at the head end is UTC70 in black, and to make the eyes on this fly I'm melting down some thick monofilament. I like to save the butt ends of my old tapered leaders for this. To make the body I'm using some nymph skin. This is the natural translucent latex in 3mm, and I'll be colouring that up with a variety of permanent markers. The Letraset ones are great if you can get hold of them. The legs on this fly are some pheasant tail fibres. When you strip them off they make little feet, it's very handy. And finally up at the head end I'll be coating everything with a thin layer of bug bond. For the body I'm switching to some GSP thread. This is from Veevus, and then it's your choice of colour of deer hair. This is some Nature Spirit spinning deer, really nice, not much fluff, very easy to work with. Here I've taken a short length of that nylon monofilament and I'm holding it in some forceps. I'm bringing the flame from a lighter quite close to it, but not directly in contact. I'm just trying to melt it rather than set it on fire. Make sure to do this in a well ventilated area. I've got the windows open because it does produce some smoke and you don't want to be breathing that in. This is a great technique for making mayfly eyes and damsel eyes, really easy. So let's get started. I've cast on my thread partway down the hook shank in order to define the length of the body that I'm aiming for, and I'm taking it down and slightly around the curve. The first thing to tie in is those eyes we made, make sure they've cooled off completely, and to tie these in, I'm tying them in line with the hook shank, making 2 loose turns and then manoeuvring them perpendicular. I think this is much easier than trying to tie it in crossways just to begin with. I'll check that they're nicely centred and then make several figure 8 wraps to secure them down. We've parked our thread, and the next material to tie in is the nymph skin. I've cut this at a slightly oblique angle so I've got a thinner bit to catch in, and then I'm working that down on top of the hook shank, over those eyes, and taking it a couple of thread wraps forwards. Make sure it's pulled taut. That'll help keep it nice and skinny up at the head of the caddis. Now if I'm going to be fishing this pattern, and really these realistic flies are probably more display pieces than actual fishing flies, but they are perfectly fishable. But if we are fishing them, it would help to have some weight up at the head end. Using a sinking line with a weighted head, you could get a very natural bobbing action in the water. I'm tying in some lead wire on the sides of the body, and that'll be in order to keep the body profile a little bit flatter. I've put another strip on the other side and then spent some time building up some bulk with the thread, and now it's time to wrap that nymph skin. Pulling it quite taut, I'm going to make 2 full wraps in front of the eyes, and then coming from behind, moving forwards over the top, and then from underneath, moving backwards, and that's created a cross wrap over the head, which makes a very natural shape. Working backwards, overlapping by about 50% with each turn, built up a nice segmented body and secured it down. You can see that that's created some great segments, and that's really going to help hold on to the markers later. To colour it up, I'm using some brown marker to begin with. I'm putting on a fairly heavy coat, and I want to make sure that it's soaking in between those layers. Once everything's coloured up, I'm then going to come in with a slightly damp cotton bud and working back to front, or well, front to back on the hook shank, I'm going to brush off the excess. And you can see that it's left that brown in the deeper recesses, but taken it off on the top, creating a slightly lighter band, and it's given it a nice ribbed effect, helped define that segmentation. I'm coming in with a slightly lighter amber marker now, adding some more colour to the top, and these markers, they will redissolve each other. You have to be careful because otherwise your lighter markers will pick up darker pigments from the other ones. Finally, I'm coming in with the black marker, touching up the eyes. They've got a little bit darker when we've burned that monofilament, but it does help to just add a little bit more colour, and then a few splotchy patches underneath the fly to add a little bit of shadow. You can really be as creative or as simple as you want with this technique, but it does make for a very attractive and natural looking pattern. For the legs I'm cheating a little bit. I've stripped off some of those pheasant tail fibres and I'm using some gel type super glue to secure them down. I'm just putting them perpendicular to the hook shank to begin with, pointing outwards, and then once we've got it all varnished up and they're a little bit stiffer and a bit more secure, then we can bend them and position them to our liking. I do realise that this is probably a little bit controversial, but I've yet to find a good way of getting them pointing through the nymph skin without them going all over the shop. So I've shown one side, and then I'm going to come in and do the other one off camera. Just gets a bit tricky to lean over. But with all the legs on, we can now move on to the varnish. Here I've got some Bug Bond Thin, putting a good glob on top of the fly, and then using my dubbing needle to spread it out, making sure that there's an even coat over everything, and including the bottom half of those legs to help secure them down and stiffen them up. We'll cure that off with the UV torch. It is on, trust me, it's just getting drowned out by the camera lights. And once all that's secure, I'm actually going to come in with some varnish and do another coat so that there's no tackiness. Here I've started to position the legs, and we'll have plenty of opportunity to do those as we work forwards. That's the realistic bit of this pattern done. It's a great technique to use, and the nymph skin can make for some very natural looking bodies. Working backwards now, it's time to make the case, and I've switched my thread over to that GSP, cast it on at the eye, and laid down a small foundation. Here I'm using some sculpin olive deer hair, and for this first wrap I'm holding the bulk of it on top of the fly. That's where I want the case to be longest. I'm working my thread through that deer hair, letting it spin out as I come back, and then packing everything down with my fingers. Make a couple of wraps of the GSP to secure, and then I'm going to keep adding small bunches of deer hair, working backwards and building up a nice meaty body that we can carve into later. Here's the final bunch done, and you see I've just about left the hook eye free, so I'm going to come in, make a few tight wraps to secure. GSP is a fairly slippery thread, so you do want to make a few extra just to hold everything in place. Then I can come in with my whip finisher, tidy everything back, and secure down the thread. I do think that this deer hair technique makes quite a natural looking cased caddis. Of course, caddis flies, some of them will pick up anything that they can find on the riverbed, small pebbles and stones and twigs and bits of leaf, and build themselves a little house. They use their saliva to stick everything together. And it's a little bit of a defence, and because it's made out of the natural things that are found in the river, it's great camouflage for them as well. I'm brushing out that deer hair, and you're going to be thinking, Alex, that looks an awful mess at the moment. And yes it is, but we're going to soon take care of that with a razor blade. Here I've got a fresh blade in my Stonfo holder, and I've got it set to make a fairly tight curve. And just running it over the eye of the hook, I'm going to build up a little cone shape at the back, much like you would if you're doing a muddler head, and just keep working my way forwards towards the head of the fly, or the bend of the hook in this case, of course we've tied backwards. Once I get a little bit closer, I don't want to trim off those legs we worked so hard to put on, so I'm going to switch over to some scissors, a little bit of finer control, and just trim everything down. Here's a view of the finished fly. Jolly good fun to tie these, and you can really get some interesting effects with those nymph skin, and it creates a very natural, wet-looking, juicy, buggy caddis hiding out in its little shell. It's a great technique to try. Hope you've enjoyed this one, and give it a go yourself. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time.